It hit me harder than I expected, the sound of their confused voices echoing through the foyer of the house I now owned. The irony wasn't lost on me. I bought the place with the same quiet precision they used to cut me out of their lives when I was 19. Back then, they said I was ungrateful, that I was throwing away a perfectly good future because I switched from accounting to computer science. My mother cried, my father went silent, and a week later, I found my duffel bag packed for me. The twist? They sold the house before they even knew who the buyer was. Listed it through a broker. No names. Just an LLC with a Pennsylvania address. Lancaster real estate wasn't cheap, but I could afford it. Not because I struck gold, but because I spent a decade chasing scraps with bloody knuckles and bitten tongue. So when I walked into the final walkthrough and saw the faded wallpaper I used to stare while waiting for punishment, I smiled. Not out of joy, out of something closer to quiet resignation. 3 months later, I sent them a notice. Rent would triple. Market rate. No favors. They didn't even know I was their new landlord until they called the property manager in a panic, asking if there'd been a mistake. He referred them to the leaseholder. That's when they called me. That phone call was something. My dad cleared his throat so much I thought he was choking. My mother tried the guilt angle, said they were on a fixed income. I told them the market didn't care. That it was just business. My voice didn't even tremble. I thought it would, but it didn't. Truth is, I practiced that conversation in my head for years. Usually around 2 a.m., lying on whatever friend's couch I hadn't worn out yet. Back when I was juggling 2 jobs and half a semester's worth of loan deferments. I'd picture them showing up, apologizing, offering to help. They never did. I'm 37 now. I write software for a logistics firm. Boring, quiet work that pays absurdly well if you know how to make systems not crash under pressure. I become what they always wanted, stable, self-sufficient, dull. But not because of them, in spite of them. And the real kicker? They asked for a discount. Said they'd been good tenants. I didn't even blink when I said no. 2 weeks passed before I heard from them again. Not a call, not even a voicemail, just a check. A physical check in the mail for the new rent amount, signed by my father in his rigid, mechanical handwriting. No note, no apology, just ink and silence. I stared at it for a long time before depositing it. And that's when the guilt showed up. Not overwhelming, just a sliver, like a hangnail that catches on everything. Because as much as I resented them, as much as I wanted them to feel the consequences of their choices, I never imagined I'd be the one forcing them into it. I never imagined I'd become a hammer. I told myself it was just business. Fair market value. They'd lived rent-free for years because of me, and even after they cut me off, I'd still quietly helped. But somewhere in there, a line had been crossed. Not by them this time. By me. What really got me wasn't the check. It was the note that came a week later, scribbled in my mother's handwriting on the back of a CVS receipt. It just said, "We miss you. Please call." Nothing else. Not even question. That's what tore something open. Because for all the bitterness, for all the nights I'd spent staring at cracked ceilings in apartments I couldn't afford, I still remembered the good days. The years before it all twisted. When my mom would bake cornbread in that same kitchen I now technically owned. When my dad taught me how to change oil in the driveway, cursing at the sky, but smiling through it. Back then, I thought we were normal, functional. But now, looking back, I think I just didn't know any better. I didn't call, but I didn't cash the check either. Instead, I sat on it. Literally. Left it under the coffee table for days like a dare. I kept imagining what would happen if I tore it up or mailed it back with a snide note. Something cold and poetic. But I didn't. Because deep down, I wasn't angry anymore. Not like before. I was just tired. The kind of tired that doesn't go away with sleep. And that's when the idea started creeping in. Not revenge. Not justice. Something more surgical. I didn't want to hurt them. I just wanted them to understand. Really understand. So I called an old friend in Baltimore, a real estate attorney. Asked what my options were. Quietly. Carefully. And what he told me, well, that's where everything started to shift. What he told me was simple, really. Legal. Clean. Emotionally devastating. He said I could subdivide the property. See, the house wasn't much by city standards, but in Lancaster, a double-lot Victorian with a finished basement and detached garage is practically gold. My parents had clung to it like it meant something. To me, it was just another chessboard. The attorney said the zoning allowed for an additional dwelling unit to be built and rented out, even sold. All I had to do was file the paperwork. And once it was approved, I could move in, right there in the backyard, 5 feet from their kitchen window. The look on my attorney's face when I said I wanted to live on the same property I just raised the rent on, well, he didn't laugh, but I could tell he thought I was unwell. Maybe I was. Maybe I still am. But it wasn't about proximity. It was about proximity to truth. Because I didn't want them to just pay the price. I wanted them to see the person they wrote off thriving within reach. To know every time they opened their curtains, I'd be there, just close enough to remind them that I didn't disappear when they stopped looking. I filed the papers. Construction started 4 months later. I kept it quiet, rented a unit across town. Didn't tell them. Let the crew show up at 7 a.m. Hammers and jackhammers like a wake-up call made of steel and second chances. My mother called first, voice high and nervous, asking what was going on. Said she saw workers in the yard. I told her the property owner was making improvements. She didn't ask more after that. My father tried to confront one of the foremen. Big mistake. He was told the work was fully permitted and that all questions should be directed to the LLC. He left a voicemail on my cell later that night. His voice didn't sound angry. It sounded small, like someone realizing the script had changed and no one gave him a copy. I didn't respond. Instead, I watched the foundation go in. A flat slab poured over the same backyard where I used to mow the lawn they now couldn't afford. And I thought about the first night I slept in my car, the shift manager who'd thrown out my application without reading it, the building guard gig where I learned to sleep with one eye open and code with the other. I never wanted to humiliate them, but I wanted them to feel a version of what I did. That kind of invisible, that kind of helpless. And the build? It became symbolic. A structure made of all the nights I ate instant noodles while they told relatives I'd figured things out. A house of memory, of boundary, of proof. It was almost poetic how it started coming together right as their lease was due for renewal. They didn't ask about the renewal. Not at first. Maybe they assumed I'd soften. That once I saw the house going up, the reality of what I was doing would knock something loose inside me. And maybe it did, but not in the way they hoped. Because as I watched that frame rise day by day, nail by nail, I realized I didn't feel triumphant. I felt surgical, like I was removing a tumor I hadn't known was still festering. Years of silent resentment, layered under fake smiles and polite Christmas visits, buried under every unspoken, "we love you, but..." So when a letter arrived from the property management office, standard language, no emotion, just a firm reminder that renewal would reflect current market value, I didn't hesitate to sign off on it. I got a reply a few days later. Not from them, of course. From a lawyer. A modest firm in downtown Lancaster I'd actually applied to once, back when I thought I might go into legal coding. The letter asked to negotiate a compromise due to hardship. That word, hardship, the audacity of it. I didn't respond, but I did frame the letter. Hung it right inside the new unit's entryway. A reminder of how fast love turns into leverage. My brother, Eric, finally called me after nearly a year of silence. Said he was trying to keep the peace. That our parents were stressed. That this whole thing was blowing up into something it didn't need to be. I listened. Let him say his piece. He still called them mom and dad like the words had weight. Still sounded like the same golden boy who got every benefit of the doubt. But this time, I didn't let him finish. I told him I wasn't punishing anyone. I was just no longer subsidizing the fantasy where I didn't exist. He got quiet. Then he said something that actually landed. He asked if I was happy. And I didn't know how to answer. Because I wasn't. Not really. The bitterness wasn't joy. The power I had now didn't undo the years I spent alone, broke, or scared out of my mind. All it did was shift the weight. Now, they carried what I used to carry. And me? I just watched. That night I sat on the back steps of the construction site, looking out their window, blinds drawn tight. I could still see the faint glow of their old kitchen light. The same light I used to study under when I was 17 and still believed effort equaled love. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was grieving something I never even had. The thing about grief is it doesn't always arrive like a storm. Sometimes it's a slow leak, a quiet drip that erodes everything you built to keep yourself upright. It hit me in strange ways. Like the time I found an old coffee mug buried in a box of tools. A chipped ceramic thing my mom bought me during my first semester at Millersville. For brain fuel, she'd said back then, before she decided she couldn't support my new direction. I stared at that mug for 5 full minutes before dropping it back into the box like it was radioactive. That's what made this so messy. They hadn't always been cruel. Not in a cartoon villain kind of way. Just limited. Trapped in the idea of who I was supposed to be, and furious when I colored outside the lines. I think part of me still wanted them to see me. Not the success. Not the paycheck. Me. The tired, flawed, sharp-edged man I became because no one came to rescue him. But instead of clarity, I kept getting noise. Neighbors whispering. Eric's passive-aggressive texts. Their lawyer, now emailing offers like I was a bank instead of son. One morning, I opened a message offering partial forgiveness of past debts in exchange for reducing the rent increase. I laughed, like really laughed, alone in my tiny studio above the bakery, where the walls smelled like cinnamon and lost time. Forgiveness? Of debts they never acknowledged when I was the one scraping by? And yet, I couldn't bring myself to reply with the venom I thought I'd earned. I just archived the email and went to work. I wrote a few lines of code, debugged an order tracking module, ate lunch alone, like usual, and when the day ended, I walked by the river for 2 hours just so I wouldn't go home and think. That night, I dreamed I was 17 again, sitting in the basement, headphones in, writing my first real program on a clunky desktop with a cracked monitor. I was trying to make a game, something small with bad pixel art and too many bugs. My dad was upstairs, watching football. My mom was yelling at Eric about something dumb. And in the dream, I kept waiting for someone to come downstairs, to check on me, to say they were proud. No one ever did. I woke up with that familiar ache in my chest. The one I used to think was loneliness, but now I know it's just the echo of being unseen. I walked to the construction site that morning, stood in front of the nearly finished unit, and stared up at the clean white siding. I realized something quietly devastating. I wasn't building a home. I was building a monument to what I survived. By the time the unit was finished, the original house, their house, had started to look smaller to me. Not physically, just smaller in presence. Like something that used to loom and now just sat there, quietly outdated. I moved into the back unit on a Sunday morning. No fanfare, no truckload of furniture, just a few essentials and a laptop bag. The same bag I carried across a dozen cities, through more couches than I can count, sleeping next to Ethernet cables and pizza boxes and the soft hum of borrowed radiators. I didn't tell them I was moving in. Didn't have to. I saw the curtain twitch that afternoon. My father's silhouette barely visible through the blinds. My mom appeared a few minutes later, standing behind him, just shapes behind a filter. I didn't wave, just slid the key into the new lock and walked inside. That first night was quiet, but thick with something I couldn't quite name. The air felt heavy, like the silence between two people who used to know each other. I made pasta, opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving since I was 27 and couldn't afford it in the first place. Ate it alone at the little table near the window, facing their back porch. And that's when I noticed it. A small object on their porch railing. Something new. A photo frame. I couldn't see the picture, not from that distance, but I knew it hadn't been there before. It was facing my window, which meant it wasn't for them. It was for me, and it wasn't some olive branch. It was a photo of the four of us. A family vacation from when I was maybe 12. Ocean City, Maryland. I remember that trip for all the wrong reasons. Sunburn, silence, and the way my dad snapped at me when I asked why Eric never had to help pack. That frame wasn't nostalgia. It was a message, a challenge. See what you're breaking? But what they didn't get, what they never got, was that the fracture happened years ago. I wasn't breaking anything now. I was just refusing to hold the cracks together. That night, I placed one of my own on the windowsill facing theirs. A photo of me, alone, at graduation, the one they didn't attend. The next morning, their blinds stayed shut. 2 days after the photo exchange, Eric showed up. Not announced, not invited, just appeared. I heard the gravel crunch under his wheels and knew instantly. That same beat-up Toyota, still with the faded community college parking sticker from a degree he never finished. I didn't open the door right away. Watched him through the peephole as he stood there, shifting his weight like a teenager, trying to avoid detention. That was the thing about Eric, he never changed. Still had that lazy boy slouch that practiced helplessness people mistook for vulnerability. Eventually, I opened the door. He didn't ask to come in, just looked around, whistled low, and said something like, "Didn't know you were serious about moving back." I didn't respond. Didn't have to. The unit spoke for itself. Clean, efficient. Mine. He tried to play nice at first. Asked how work was going. Said he heard I did something with code. He'd always talked about my job like it was some confusing side hobby. Like I spent my days clicking around in Microsoft Paint. And then, true to form, he got to the point. He said Mom and Dad were stressed. That the rent hike had been harsh. That I was making a point, sure, but wasn't it time to move on? I asked him if he remembered the time our parents made me sell my car to help cover Eric's summer classes. The ones he dropped 3 weeks in. He didn't answer, just stared at the floor. I told him this wasn't about punishment. It was about accountability. That maybe for once, someone else could pick up the tab. Someone who'd coasted through every family gathering with a smirk and zero expectation. He tried to say I was being cold, that this whole thing had gone too far. that I was better than this. But that's when I realized something. He didn't believe that. Not really. What he meant was, I was supposed to stay better than this. Above it. Predictable. The reliable brother. The one who forgave everything quietly so he could stay in the background. I told him I wasn't angry. I just finally stopped apologizing for being inconvenient. He left without another word. And when he got to the car, I saw him glance back at the porch. At the framed photo in my window. That night, the frame was gone from theirs. After Eric's visit, the silence thickened. Not just the kind between people, but the kind that sits inside you, pressing down behind your ribs. I'd won, technically. They were still in the house, paying the rent I set. And I was living 20 feet away in a place they never intended me to own. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like surviving a storm only to realize the damage wasn't outside. It was internal. A quiet rot, slow and old. I kept busy. Work, errands, small repairs in the unit. I even started running again. There's a loop around Lawns Park I used to do back in my college days before everything cracked, and I found myself returning to it. Lap after lap, try to outpace something I couldn't name. Then came Thanksgiving. No text, no invite, not even a forwarded email from Eric trying to play diplomat. And yet, I wasn't surprised. What had surprised me was the smell. Around 2 p.m., while I was half watching a rerun of some cooking show and pretending I didn't care, the scent of roast turkey wafted in through the slightly cracked kitchen window. My mother's stuffing. That smell used to mean warmth, family, paper napkins folded just right. Now it just meant something was happening next door, and I wasn't part of it. I stood there, fork in hand, listening to the faint sound of laughter bleeding through the walls. Eric's voice. His girlfriend's maybe. A few others. It hit me hard. Not because I wanted to be there, but because they had rebuilt the idea of family without me. Fast, clean, like I'd never been necessary to begin with. And the cruelest part? I had done the same thing. Not with people, but with silence. With withdrawal. With this little fortress I'd constructed in their backyard. I stood by the window, letting the cold air cut into my arms. I don't know how long I was there. Maybe minutes. Maybe longer. Long enough to hear a chair scrape. A glass drop. Laughter again. That night, I didn't eat the dinner I made. I just sat at the table and stared at the full plate, like it might explain something I still didn't understand. Not grief. Not rage. Just the quiet, persistent ache of not being missed. The holidays passed in that strange, numb blur they tend to create when you're on the outside looking in. Lights went up on the old porch. A wreath on the door. I didn't decorate. Couldn't bring myself to fake cheer when everything around me felt like it was held together by old tape and colder silence. Then, on a gray Wednesday in January, my father slipped on the icy steps and broke his wrist. I didn't hear it happen. I saw the aftermath. Ambulance lights bouncing off the snowbanks. Neighbors standing around like the cold could excuse their curiosity. I watched from my window, hands buried deep in my sweatshirt pockets, heart thudding somewhere lower than it should have been. That moment messed with me more than I admitted. Because instinct tugged at me like a thread, go outside, offer help, ride along to the hospital like a good son would. But I didn't move. Not out of cruelty, out of paralysis. That's what years of estrangement do to you. You don't feel less. You just forget how to respond when it matters. Later that night, I got a text from Eric. Just one sentence. You've made your point. I stared at those 4 words until the screen dimmed. I didn't reply, because he still didn't get it. There was no point. This wasn't some chess match I wanted to win. It was a consequence of everything they'd left unsaid, undone, unresolved. The next morning, I found a note taped to my door. No envelope. Just a folded piece of paper, cheap pen ink bleeding through. It was from my mother. She said he'd be okay, that he was stubborn about using the cane, that things were harder lately. She asked if we could meet for coffee. Just her. No guilt. No, we need to talk. Just coffee. And that, of all things, is what broke something loose in me. Because after all the yelling, silence, cold rent increases, and standoffs made of memory and drywall, she finally asked for something simple. Not forgiveness. Not an explanation. Just coffee. And I didn't know what scared me more, saying yes or saying no. I said yes. Not right away. I sat with the note for a full day, tucked it under my keyboard like a paperweight for indecision. I don't know what finally tipped me over. Maybe it was the silence, maybe the snow falling too softly, or maybe just the weariness of carrying it all alone. We met at Mean Cup, the one tucked into that little slope off Harrisburg Avenue. The same cafe where I used to study for finals before everything with my parents fell apart. Strange how memory and resentment can sit at the same table without even acknowledging each other. She looked older. Of course she did. We both did. But it wasn't just age. It was that hollow kind of exhaustion you can't Botox away. The kind life earns you after enough small heartbreaks stack into something permanent. She smiled when she saw me. I didn't smile back. I sat down, ordered black coffee, and waited. What surprised me most was how little she tried to explain. No tears, no justifications. Just small things. She asked how work was, if I still liked Baltimore winters, if I ever fixed my old laptop. And then, after a long pause, she said something like, it wasn't fair. How we handle things. What they expected of me. What they chose to ignore. That nearly undid me. Not because it fixed anything, but because it was the first time she acknowledged it out loud. The great unwritten truth of our family. That some people were allowed to fall apart, while others were expected to hold everything together without being noticed. She didn't ask for forgiveness, and I didn't offer it. We just sat there. Two people who once shared a home, now sharing a table in a coffee shop where the heat barely worked and the Wi-Fi always glitched. Before we parted, she slipped something across the table. A photo. Not framed. Just an old print, bent at the corners. Me in my cap and gown. The graduation they missed. She said she'd found it in a drawer, that she kept it even after they told people I didn't walk that year. I didn't ask why. I just took it. And for a second, I saw her not as my mother. Not as the woman who shut the door on me at 19. But as a person, flawed, scared, trying to hold on to something in her own quiet, broken way. That night, I put the photo on my shelf, next to the framed letter from their lawyer. Because sometimes love and pain belong on the same ledge. Spring came early that year in Lancaster. One of those warm snaps in March that fools you into thinking things are changing. But some changes don't show up like sunlight. Some you only notice when you stop flinching. I never lowered their rent. Never offer an apology. But I did remove the photo from my window. Quiet gesture. Not forgiveness. Not surrender. Just space. And they stayed. Month after month, checks came on time. No more legal letters. No more passive-aggressive silences turned loud by what wasn't said. Just the dull rhythm of people choosing not to fight anymore. I'd see my mom in the yard sometimes, tending to that flower bed she always neglected when I was a kid. One day, I watched her plant daffodils. That felt oddly cruel, planting something that wouldn't bloom for weeks in soil that had seen so much pettiness. But also, it felt like a kind of defiance I recognized. Eric didn't reach out again. I didn't expect him to. Some bridges stay charred for a reason. I still live in that little back unit. Still code late into the night. Still jog past Long's Park when the weather lets me pretend I've outrun the past. I've dated. I've tried therapy. Neither stuck. But I'm working on it. The house? I haven't been inside since the day I bought it. There's no point. I already know the layout. Every corner. Every creak. Every place I used to exist in silence. And yet, some mornings I catch myself looking out my window, waiting for some sign of movement. Someone opening a curtain, stepping out onto the porch, holding something in their hands they don't know how to give back. It never happens. But the funny part? I keep looking anyway. Because that's what we do with wounds that never scar right. We revisit them. Not to hurt, but to remember the exact shape of what never healed.